In March of 2019, Billboard quietly removed a song from the country charts. No press conference, no public apology, just the line that said the song did not embrace enough elements of modern country music. Now, mind you, this song had a banjo, it had a rural narrative, it had horses, trucks, and escape fantasies. This song was Old Town Road, and the artist was Lil Nas X. And in that moment, the industry accidentally told the truth. Because the question was never whether the song was country, the question was who was allowed to be country. And once you understand that, the rest of the genre conversation starts to really unravel. This is Losing the Plot. Okay, guys, welcome back to another episode. Thank you guys for staying with me up until now. And today we're going to talk about genres, which is one of my favorite things to talk about, just because it's such a complex thing, and it's one of those things where I think like the Taylor Swift episode is we're talking about genres, but we're not really talking about genres. You know what I'm saying? Like it's one of those conversations that is so latent and potent with so many different things, and I hope in this next hour to be able to share kind of my thoughts around that, as well as educate and inform as well. Because again, one thing I love about this podcast and why I love talking about pop culture so much is that when we talk about things like music and art and popular culture and popular narratives, we're talking about our society and the things that we feel, and those things are just avatars for discussing those things. And this country genre topic is definitely one of that. Definitely in the past couple of years in mainstream culture, coincidentally with the return of a Republican president in America, there's been a resurgence of country music in the mainstream. Not to say that country music has ever died or gone anywhere, but in popular arts, we've seen definitely artists like Beyoncé, Lana Del Rey, Sabrina Carpenter stuff, a bit influenced by some of that. A bunch of artists have dipped their toe in the country pool, and which also obviously will bring out conversation about country values and who is country and who isn't. So I think it's a topic that everybody's talking about, or is everybody still thinking about in one way or the other. I will say in the past year, I think last year was probably the peak of that. But in the past year, it seems like things have kind of started to stabilize a bit more. But I really thought that talking about it now is still it's going to be an evergreen conversation, because country is something that comes in and out of popular mainstream Western cultural conversation from time to time, and each time I think with a different edge, but still around the same themes. And if it's your first time listening to the podcast, welcome to Losing the Plot. It's the podcast where we talk about systems underneath sound, the history behind it, hits, the rules, and how those things show themselves when someone breaks them. And I know that I promised this would be a popular culture podcast, but we've only talked about music. We will get to other things eventually. There are things I have thoughts around. Again, my thing is, because I want this to be an academic kind of program, I do want to make sure that my thoughts around them are fully formed before I talk about them. So I don't want to come here and just regurgitate facts to you and figures and things like that, but also give my perspective and make sure that my perspective is very formed before I share them. Even sometimes I listen to last week's episode and I was like, there were some things I didn't say and I wanted to say and things of that nature. But for the most part, I was happy with what I could say. So I think definitely a thing that I might revisit in the future is having addendum episodes to something to say that this is what I think about this thing now and this is how this thing has evolved. And we will get to movies and TV shows and fashion and all of those things in the near future. But for now, because we're just starting, and music is my real comfort space, I'm going to keep talking about music for a while, and eventually I promise we will pivot. So if this is your first episode, I want to just let you know that this is not a review podcast. It's not even a history podcast. We're not ranking albums and we're not chasing takes. What we're doing is we're sitting with context long enough to understand why moments land the way they do. But before we go any further please make sure you follow the show wherever you are listening. So subscribe, leave a comment if your platform allows it. This podcast really, it survives on participation, so I would really appreciate your thoughts. And again, if I say anything that you think is blasphemous or that you think I didn't understand the context of, I'm not Jesus and I can be wrong about things, so please feel free to, you can shoot me an email at adeoluwamusic@gmail.com or drop a comment on whatever platform you're listening to. I always check them and I will respond once I can. And because today we are losing the plot on genre itself, specifically why country and hip hop are framed as opposites when they share the same DNA, I definitely want to hear all perspectives essentially on what that is. Okay, let's start. I think that claiming that country and hip hop are cousins, I don't think it's that big of a claim. I don't think it's revolutionary. I think anyone that has ears, maybe not consciously, but subliminally, you listen to country music, especially country music that has come out in the past decade, and you hear a lot of hip hop influences. Now, of course, in the past year or so, a lot of rappers have just gone blatantly country and collaborated with more country artists. But in terms of the beats and things of that nature, they are starting to align and collide more and more. And I think that it's because country and hip hop are cousins, not because they were recently collided, but because they were separated on purpose. So, which is, I think, a big claim, but that's my huge thesis here is that the distinction between those two genres matters because when people think about genre fusion today, they try to frame it as it being something new, something disruptive, or something experimental. But in reality, what we are really, really witnessing is less of a collision than a reunion. So I think of these two genres because of who because of who made them. We're always in the same family, and when I say who made them, I mean black people. Yeah, yeah, because they are both genres made by black people. They always came from the same people, like from the same family, and so they were always together. But we know how that kind of goes. Where when you think of a country musician today, you don't, depending on who you are, for most people would think of you have the picture in your head. It's usually going to be a guitar playing white man, maybe with a cowboy hat or maybe with a trucker hat. And when you think of hip hop, you're thinking of depending on who you are again, but most people would think of an African American man. Like that's kind of the boxes we have put those genres in. But I part of my claims here is to challenge you to think of that as being a more recent categorization than what has happened before. Because before the genre country existed, and today we're really tackling them as genre. So I don't want it to get overly political. That's not really my lane. But I'm really tackling the sound and the history behind the sound today. So before the genre country existed and before the genre of hip hop existed, before there were radio formats and award categories at the Grammys that change and change back, Billboard charting things that change and change back, and before there were streaming playlists, the foundation of these two genres were already very intertwined. And I want to start something as basic as the instrumentation. So, for example, most people, or it is kind of accepted as a fact that the banjo has been treated now as a visual shorthand for whiteness, Appalachia, and rural Americana. But that story is really incomplete and at best dishonest. Again, these things that we now know about the genre or the things we've come to accept as the genre are not coincidental. There's a lot more at play here. There's a lot more at play in terms of who owns it and who gets to move around, which we'll get to. But the banjo did not originate in Appalachia, which is where, like, when people start to talk about, I remember last year, I kind of want to look this up, but I remember last year, I forget what award it was. I believe it was the American Awards, and Shabuzi was on stage with one country artist, and she was talking about the history of country, and she started with talking about I believe the Carters, because a lot of people trace the Carters as the Carter family as people that invented country music. Now, that's okay. Actually, let me dig into this moment a bit more. I think this moment is a very instructional moment about what we're talking about today. So at the 2025 American Music Awards, right, Shabuzi, who is a country star, a lot of people will know a bar song Tipsy, was also featured prominently on Beyonce's Cowboy Carter, and his godmother is Dolly Parton. Anyway, Shabuzi, that guy, he went viral because during the award show he was presenting with Mega Maroney, And when Megan was talking, I'm pretty sure, and I don't want to put this on Megan because I think she was reading from a teleprompter. I'm not sure of that, but I believe so. And when that happened, Megan said that the Carter family invented country music. And then Shabuzi, like many of us, was like, the who invented who? And it's just so funny because Shabuzi is obviously, it has Nigerian roots, and his Nigerianness really shows because he's not able to conceal his reaction in this moment. So he side eyes her as she says that, she says the Carter family, and to be fair to the Carter family, Carter family is considered the first family of country music, and they were around from around the 1920s to the 1940s. But the genre's roots are diverse, and they are heavily, heavily influenced by African American musicians and African American history in general. So it was this the statement was just one of those things where, like, again, this is not about Megan, and I believe that after the event and the backlash, Shabuzi said, defended Megan, and said that he wasn't reacting to her, was just reacting to the statement, which I don't even think she wrote. But the true history of country music is vital and unacknowledged because it is black music. It's country music as it exists today is a result of black artists, especially artists like Leslie Riddle, who helped the Carter family gather songs and taught Mabel Carter of the Carter family a famous guitar style, right? So I don't want to be I really don't want to make this a political thing, oh my god, but it's just like colonialism. it's it's colonialism is just going to be a recurring theme of why the world that we live in is the way we live in it today, and why things are. And I think that's why talking about genre kind of breaks this down, because you think something as simple as a genre that is brought out of people's experience, and you think about how it has moved ownership through who tells the story, who lives, who dies, who tells the story. Sorry, that was a Hamilton reference, but literally, but no, but what's a Hamilton? Because the person that gets to tell the history is the victor, who lives, and literally who does, who tells the story, right? And because of that, over the course of history, we have moved the ownership of this genre from its original owners to other people. So the original group, this is the Carter family that we're talking about, which featured AP Carter, Sarah Carter, and Mabel Carter. They are foundational to country music. I think that's very important. Two things can be true, and this is why conversations need to be complex in understanding, because we don't want to lean into too much of something and remove credibility from people in certain ways. So the original group, they are foundational to country music, and they are, again, we know them as the full family of country music, but the truth is that it's not solely from them. It's way more nuanced than that, and that is why talking about these things is very important, because it's now we have given the Carter family, we talk about the Carter family, everybody knows about the Carter family, and we don't talk about the person that taught them how to do it. And that is the issue that's going to come down, because going further down, when the descendants of the person who taught the Carter family wants to reclaim the genre from them, it becomes an issue. So that is, I feel like that's a really great way to ground this conversation, because again, one of the reason why I think about this often is that I think about Lil Nas' Old Town Road, which I don't think is a country song. So I think let me also say that I don't think it's a country song, but I think it being removed from the Billboard charts was so interesting, because just a couple of years before, I remember Taylor Swift's Red had come out, and it was considered a country album, and there are country songs on Red, but far and large, Red is a pop record. Red has I Knew You Were Trouble and We Are Never Getting Back Together, but nobody thought of removing Red from the country charts because of that, because she was a Caucasian female, and that kind of thing. Like, so let me talk about the Carter family a little bit more. So the Carter family consisted of AP Carter, his wife Sarah Carter, and his sister-in-law Mabel Carter. And yes, they brought Appalachian folk music to a wider audience, and they had songs like, if you want to check those songs out, which I want to say this is the Wildwood Flower and Wabash Cannonball. There is a guitar style that Mabel Carter developed. It's called the Carter scratch, which involves like, it's like you're playing melody on bass strings and rhythm on treble strings simultaneously. Now, that style of playing guitar, which is very very known to the world now as being part of country music, that was taught to her by an African American called Leslie Riddell. And to be honest, a lot of people argue that the Carter family story has been used to whitewash the version of country music, ignoring the black people who contributed to the genre's origins, right? So that is but you know what's interesting about that is, despite all of that, despite all the controversy around the lack of credit given to black contributors during their time, the Carter family is still recognized as the family that popularized country music. And I guess this is where, like, again, we can have a nuanced conversation. I guess creating something and making it popular they're not one and the same. Especially if we're talking about a time when racism was prevalent and all of those things. But we also know, like, the reason why we have things like sampling is because, again, going back, the history deep dive of this is important, so I don't want to just gloss over it. But you know, the reason why we have things like sampling was because, like, you know, white artists would take songs from black artists all the time and not give them credit, and the songs would blow up. Then black artists started taking songs from white artists and the songs were blowing up, and they're like, oh, wait a second, we need to fix that. So we have sampling. So talking about race is dicey, but we can't really honestly give these conversations a grounding if we don't start there. And I think it informs the entire conversation. Enslaved Africans built and played early banjos long before they became symbols of white rural culture. These instruments were very central to black musical life in the American South, especially in string bands that played dances, and they would have like these communal gatherings and folk songs. So when early American folk music was forming, black musicians were not just peripheral, they were not just contributions, they were the foundation. They were foundation now. Black string bands existed throughout the South. They played reels, ballads, dance tunes, and spirituals. And you know now how, like, there are different types of country music as well. There are different flavors of country music. It literally is in similitude to that. Right, so the different type, so that country music is also one genre where it's very diverse. There's honky tonk, there's bluegrass, there's outlaw country, there's the Nashville sound, there's the countrypolitan, which is countrypolitan, there's country pop, there's Americana, and all these different styles are defined by the specific instrumentations like fiddles and banjos or electric guitars. But the core of country is it's the storytelling. What's kind of, apart from the instrument type, is like all of those kind of tell the difference. They tell a specific story. There's way country songs are usually written, right? So, but there are different types of country music, and that spans from there being the people that made the foundation of it having different flavors of what they did with it, and how. And country music is also a genre that is weirdly very geographical. I'm not going to go too deep into that because I need to read more on that, but I know that one of the also reasons why we have different genres because of like the different geography where the songs and the sounds evolved. So what that brings us to now is erasure, right? So artists like there's an artist called DeFord Bailey. Those artists were not animals; they were evidence. DeFord Bailey was a harmonica virtuoso and one of the stars of the Grand Ole Prix. If you know the Grand Ole Prix is where like it's an iconic stage for you to go and perform. But Bailey helped shape early country performance culture, and his popularity helped build the institution itself. But yet, we don't really talk about him. His story is rarely taught when country music tells its own story. Not because he wasn't important, but because his presence complicates the narrative the industry wants to sell. And that brings us to another point, is that, you know, there are people that there are people behind things, and not to start up the Illuminati conspiracy theories and things like that, but there are things that happen, like I mentioned before, like the world that we live in now, in terms of music and other things. But music helps us understand these things. Is there because people, someone, some a couple of people somewhere sat down and were like, let's own this narrative, let's keep this cute in this way, and this is the story we want to tell. And through choosing to do that, they erase parts of it. As country music has become increasingly marketed to white audiences, black artists, their contribution was minimized, sidelines, and sometimes erased entirely. But the sound remained. So because this was the foundation of the sound definitely remained. What changed was the credit. Who are we giving credit to? And now that we are giving credit to these people, who gets to just show up and make a country record and go home, and who can move freely amongst more fluidly, which is where we get to Lil Nas X's kind of intersection with all this genre politics. For everyone that's listening, I think everybody here would have heard a country song at least once, or have as an idea of what a country song sounds like. But country music, most people will describe it as being simple, stripped down, or very rhythmically basic. But again, that's another framing that ignores its lineage, right? The classic boom chick rhythm is not isolated. It comes from blues, work songs, and spirituals. It comes from call and response patterns, from the steady pulse, like that. So when the slaves were working, the steady pulse that they needed to accompany the labor that they were doing, from music that was designed to be felt as much as it would be heard, right? So all of these things, like you're seeing how the people who made this genre, or who are the foundation of this genre, how their influence on it is how it has shown up today, right? They're making these songs that to tell specific stories, to keep their history going. They're making these songs to accompany them while they are laboring. So that is kind of like I guess my little understanding of the genesis of country. So let's talk about hip hop for a second, because that's the crux of the conversation. Hip hop's emphasizes hey, Jesus Christ of Nazareth. Sorry guys, today is y'all just gotta stay with me today. I'm a little coarse, and I'm a little y'all know how I get when I get excited about a topic. The words start fumbling, I start getting everywhere. So just stay with me with the pronunciations. I would like to say that English is my first language, but it kind of is, to be very honest. So I have no excuse. So please just stay with me. Hang in there with my pronunciation. Hip hop's emphasis on groove, repetition, and percussive storytelling is a modern evolution of the same logic, right? So that if you think about all the things I've said about country music, that same line of music that tells our story, music that has a groove, that has call and response patterns, music that accompanies labor, is essentially how hip-hop started as well, but with different technology, different delivery, but essentially the same foundation. So where country has a guitar, hip-hop has a sampler. Where country has a fiddle, hip-hop has a drum machine. Where it's a walk song, hip-hop has a loop. But the function of it stays the same. Both genres prioritize rhythm as the carrier of the story. They prioritize telling a story kind of plainly through lyric writing as the identity of the genre, not really the ornaments, which will come later, not the background, but the structure. These two genres have the same structure innately. That's why both genres they feel really grounded and physical and direct, because they are built for their bodies, not just their ears. So storytelling is essential. Essentially, what I'm trying to show you now is that storytelling is at the heart of these two genres. That's why I would say that their causal relationship is undeniable. Country really lives by, there's a phrase in country music where they say 3 chords and a truth, but that's not about musical limitation. If you think about it directly, it's about the narrative priority. Like, this genre is made to tell a story, to pass on history, and to say it directly. Because you think about other genres like pop music, I want to say sometimes some alternative genres as well, the So there are some genres where the core of the genre is the instrumentation, like think about psychedelic rock and things of that nature, where we're thinking about the instruments that is that we are hearing. There are some genres where the crux of the genre is the vocal performance, which is like 80s pop to me. There's some genres where the crux of the genre is the style of performance. I'm thinking about rock music as well for that. But for hip hop and country, the storytelling is the core of the genre. So country and hip hop, they operate on that same principle. For example, hip hop rap is rhythm. When I think about rap, I think about rhythmic poetry rooted like in lived experience that documents play, struggle, desire, pride, failure, ambition. But again, you take that core narrative value and you put it against country music, and those are both genres. Those two genres are diary genres, which is why again starting with country was a smart move for a singer songwriter like Taylor Swift, because it really helps her lean into that, being able to chronicle survival, being able to chronicle heartbreak, being able to chronicle faith, loss, family, regional identity. All of those things exist as much in country as they do in hip hop. So when country singers talk about their small town and the back road and the job that broke their body, or the girl in the next church that wants to take your husband, hip hop raps about the block, the city, the system that you're boxed in. Those are similitudes of the genres. Again, different imagery but same impulse. They both have something to say. They say this is who I am, this is where I'm from, this is what I've lived through. They think about those two genres. That's what people say through these songs. When you listen to a country song, you can tell this person's from Tennessee. When you listen to a rap song, you can tell this person's from Detroit. This is where what happens in Tennessee, this is what happened in Detroit, this is who I am, this is what I've lived through. That's why I believe that these genres have historically resonated with mostly working class audiences. Again, anything can be co-opted by the elite side, but think about when hip hop started from the streets with black and Latin communities getting together in parties, working class people looking to have fun. You think about country, like we said, people need something to keep their stories alive while they're working and share these stories. It's because of this. It's not because of the simplicity of the genres, really, but because of their honesty. There are genres where the music is built from the ground up. So that would now bring us to a logical place to ask the question of, so if these roots are shared, if they have these shared roots and these shared values, why do these genres feel so divided? Excuse me. Why does one genre feel coded as white and rural and one feel coded as black and urban? Why does the fusion feel transgressive instead of it feeling inevitable? And that is kind of circling back to where I started from. The divide was built deliberately. Someone somewhere said, the blacks can have this one. Sorry. Someone said, this is for us, and that's for the blacks. And again, by innately doing that, we are classifying one as, you guys, well, maybe you don't know, but do you know there's a whole story about hip hop not getting recognized by the Grammys for such a long time, and things like of that nature, where it's like this is a lesser sound because of the people who listen to it and people who make it. And that great divide is how the industry segregated the sound. So again, we've established that hip hop and country are related, but there's a reason why we are kind of taught to forget that relationship. And to understand that, we really have to talk about the moments where music stopped being culture first and became product first. So let's go back. This is where losing the plot. We are all gonna go to school today. Let's go to the 1920s, right? In the 1920s was when the idea of genre really started to flourish, and that was when genre became a marketing tool. So in the 1920s, the American music industry was not trying to categorize music by sound. It was trying to categorize music by consumers. And that is why we have genres as we have them today. Which is why when artists like myself say that we are genre bending, it's not just a cool thing to say. It's that if you close your eyes sometimes, the things that we call genres, they don't really make sense. They don't really, the boxes are so, again, we have attached a lot of visual language and cultural understanding to these genres over the years. But if you close your eyes sometimes and listen to an Afrobeat song, it could be an R&B song. If you really want it to be, if you listen to a folk song, it could be a country song. Like, the reason why we have genres as the way we have them now is because when they came into the forefront of mass consumption, what the labels were trying to do was categorize consumers. So who listens to what, and then who are we going to try and sell what to, right? Record labels were faced with, at that time, a growing diverse audience, and the simple question they were trying to solve. Here comes capitalism. How do we sell more records to more people without letting those people mix? So they segmented them. So white rap music was labeled hillbilly, and later softened into country and obviously western. And black music was labeled race records. Race records was what they used to call black. Like if a song had a black singer on it, genre notwithstanding, it was called a race record, and that's literally how things start to bubble up, because that kind of categorization is not subtle, it's explicit. So you think about race records, you think about records that encompass blues, jazz, gospel, early folk forms, but the main thing was that it was performed by black artists. And hillbilly records were marketed as authentic sounds of white rural America. So these genres, even from this is even before hip hop really comes to the mix, because hip hop is still brewing when country has arrived. The genres, they do not diverge because the music demanded it. They diverged because the market demanded separation. Racism. Yay! Like so many times I go down a deep dive on YouTube watching video essays and reading essays and doing research about things I find interesting. I'm like, oh, why is this way? Why do we do this? Racism. You get to a point, you read, then you get there. Racism. Oh, okay. And so if the foundation for the divergence was racism, you now understand why many years after, when people are finding it hard to describe why this song doesn't fit in this box and this doesn't do this and that and this and that, it's hard for them to say directly what they are thinking, which is like, he's black. Because now we live in a more, well, maybe not now, but we used to even briefly live in a more politically correct world. And so you can't just say, oh, you don't get to be a country singer because you're black. You have to find a way to do it. You have to find a way to get around that. And again, so I guess we'll get to Cowboy Carter, but one of the reasons why Cowboy Carter is important as a record is because Cowboy Carter makes that conversation inescapable. It says, oh, she can't do this because, well, yeah, look at her. But how do we say that in a way that doesn't sound like that? And I don't even think they tried not to say that. They literally did kind of say that, because do you know the crazy part about Cowboy Carter is that there are some songs on Cowboy Carter that when these people are listening, some of these people are listening to, they're like, oh my god, this is not real country, blah 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 blah. Then a white person does a cover of the same song with the same instrumentation, and they're like, oh, who is this? I love this country song. These are the issues. These are the yams. These are the issues. Because again, these genres diverge because markets demanded separation. So once that decision was made, everything else followed. The racial categorization did not just affect record bins, it created entirely new ecosystems. So this is where we get to separate charts, separate radio stations, separate touring circuits, separate press coverage, separate award categories. You see what's happening here? You see how we get to 2019 and Lil Nas X? Over time, however, these systems, they really taught audiences not just what to listen to, but how to understand what they were hearing. So we start to frame country music as a heritage, and hip hop and its own predecessors are framed as a trend. So when you're talking about country music, you're talking about tradition oftentimes, or you are framing it that way, and you're framing black music as novelty. But once these frames are, after I should say these frames were established, they hardened, right? People, like over time, like maybe the first 10 years, 20 years, people are still understanding it. But after you repeat something over and over and over and over again, it starts to become true, it starts to become factual. This is where things get really, to me, insidious, because authenticity is often presented as this neutral, almost moral concept in music. But the truth is, and this is where, like, again, I'm making big claims here. So if you don't agree with me, please let me know. But authenticity, or what we perceive as authenticity, is not objective. It's something that has been enforced, something that we have been taught to react to, growing up through media, through culture, through music, through film, through presentation of celebrities. Over time, country authenticity became coded as white, rural, working class, and traditional. Even when black musicians had helped shape the genre and their presence was treated, but their presence was treated as an exception rather than the foundation. And for whatever reasons, the Caucasians didn't want to touch hip hop, which praise God, I guess. But for whatever reason, hip hop's authenticity, as a result, then becomes coded as black, urban, contemporary, and resistant. But because again, these genres are built from similar bones, they were always going to evolve. But maybe because of the racialized coding within those boundaries. So this racialized coding I'm talking about, the main thing that it does is that it makes the genre feel natural. It makes the segregation feel inevitable, kind of. And most importantly, when artists would then try to mix these genres, it will make the crossover feel suspicious. So this way we get always start talking about the authenticity of the two genres, but also who gets to borrow and who gets policed. Enter Lil Nas X and Taylor Swift. Actually, before we get to Lil Nas X and Taylor Swift, there are a couple of people that we can draw a line from, right? So let's talk about white artists borrowing from black genres. So when a white artist borrows from a black genre, it's always framed as bold and experimental or genre bending. I think the first person that comes to my mind, and if you're a music history buff, you know this for sure, is Elvis Presley. Because Elvis Presley is always, again, we love Elvis, right? Love Mr. Presley. But Elvis borrowed heavily. Heavy to the point of not ignoring from black music and black genres and black way of performing. And he was hailed as a pioneer. When Miley was reinventing herself in 2013? 2013? I could be wrong. I think so. Banger's 2013 album, 2014. When Miley Cyrus was a light-skinned black woman. When she was in her hip-hop era, it was framed as her reinventing herself. When before Post Malone became a country, which I did not see coming. I'm not talking about these artists in a way of ridicule or in a way to, I love Elvis, I love Miley, I love Post. Like, I'm just contextualizing why they're able to borrow and move around genres in relation to their identity, which they are inextricable, right? Post Malone coming onto the scene as this white boy making hip-hop music, making trap music, it was like, oh, this guy is versatile. And then when he switched over to country, it was like, oh, okay, range. But with people I've mentioned so far, right, their moves around, what it does is that it centers creativity. So when we talk about them, that they're creative, they have range. But let a black person step into a white coded genre, it's a problem. I think this is my theory. I think this is why Beyoncé featured Miley and Post Malone on her country album. I think she was trying to prove a point of this exact thing that I'm saying. Because again, when Miley decided she wanted to be a hip hop girl, and one thing about the blacks, the African American community, they're going to embrace you. It's kind of like Nigerians and Afrobeats to an extent, where if somebody that is not Nigerian starts making an Afrobeat song, they'll be like, yo, hey, my sister, my brother, whatever. And that was how Miley and Post were treated. They were Miley's biggest songs from that era were made by Mike Will Made It. Post Malone, obviously loved by the hip hop community when he was a hip hop star. So when white people borrow from black genres, it's bold, it's experimental, and they are welcomed. I think even more important is that they are welcomed. But when black artists enter Beyoncé, enter Lil Nas X, step into white coded genre, all of a sudden they are questioned, they are scrutinized, they have to prove their belonging. One of the biggest, more interesting things has come out of Beyonce's Cowboy Carter is like people like, she didn't go to Nashville to kiss the ring. She has to prove that she belongs here, and it's just like, did she make a country record or not? Okay. But she has to go kiss the ring. How come Miley didn't go to downtown Brooklyn when she was making hip hop? The jokes, unfortunately, in this aspect, they write themselves, because when black artists do it, it's not because the music fails. It's because their presence disrupts the imagined boundaries. This is why black artists working in country are often described as crossing over rather than returning. It's why their success is treated as an anomaly rather than a revolution. We saw that with when Beyonce won country album of the year. Literally, in a very not so subtle move, the Grammys changed the categories next year. Like, this is not gonna happen again. A black woman, best country album of the year, never again. And it literally it might happen again, but amen. So the crux of what we're talking about now, right? If you have caught on, is like we're talking about genre as a border. As a border where some people get pulled and some people can move around fully. So at this point, it becomes very clear that genre is doing more than describing sound, right? Being a border, it exists to control movement, and that's controlling determines who is welcomed, who is tolerated, and who is excluded. Big on excluded. Also, the border of genre also decides whose experimentation is celebrated and whose is resisted. So you can't ever say that a genre crossover is neutral, because when an artist crosses a genre line, they're not just making a musical choice to the old guards. They are testing an invisible social rule. And because all of us have been seasoned and kind of brought up to accept these norms, we don't question them. Again, they go largely unquestioned. So why does this matter? I think I've talked about why this matters to me, but what I want you as a listener, as a music listener, to take from this is that this system weren't dismantled when streaming arrived. They were inherited. So when the charts look the way they look right now and playlists feel generalized, it's because there are certain cultural expectations that we have been trained as listeners and people in society to accept as the norms. Because these passive aggressions, they show up in radio decisions, they show up in award categories, they show up in press coverage, and they show up in when we're describing who is a pop star and who is just an R&B star, who is universal and who gets labeled niche. Right? This is why moments like Lil Nas X being removed from the country chart feel jarring. Because what those moments do is that they expose the machinery. They remind us that genre is not always about music. It is about power. And once you see that, I think you start to hear things differently. What if this artist was black? What if this artist was white? What would change in how I perceive this music? Again, because of how similar they are in structure, country and country and hip hop anyways, were always going to intersect, and they have intersected a lot. But there is a genre called country rap, and I don't think that genre is an accident, right? Because by the time Lil Nas X released Old Town Road, the industry already acted as if something unprecedented had happened. As if this was like the first time that these two worlds had collided and a line was being crossed for the first time. But it's wrong. And that for me is very, very convenient, because long before Old Town Road, country and hip hop were already in conversation. Again, because of the old guard, they were never given that same legitimacy. Before we even get to hip hop, we need to talk about the narrative recitation that country music has always flirted with rhythmic speech, right? Talking blues. Like, think about, again, close your eyes, think about the things that make this genre. Think about how country singers deliver their cadences, the talking blues, the spoken verses, the story song that sits somewhere between singing and speaking. Those are elements of hip hop as well. Think about a song like A Boy Named Sue or The Devil Went to Georgia. Those are not songs with like melodic showcases. They are performances, vocal performances, and instrumentation performances built around cadence, timing, and narrative delivery. You know what else is built around cadence, timing, and narrative delivery? Right. Because in those songs, those country songs that I mentioned, they function less as traditional singing and more like oral storytelling set to rhythm. The same structure that is foundation to hip hop. So when people say country rap is unnatural, they're literally ignoring the very glaring relationship between these two genres. And the idea that black artists only entered the the country genre recently is also very false. Two dates I can give you. In 1970, Parliament released a song called Little Old Country Boy. In 1964, Prince Buster recorded Texas Hold Up, a track that blended, I would say, Western imagery and rhythmic spoken delivery and that black music sensibilities. These songs were not gimmicks. They were more like, I would say, experiments rooted in like a shared cultural space, because what they showed is that country aesthetics and black rhythmic traditions were already overlapping. Right? So you think about, even if you go to the 1990s, right? Let's again, y'all. This is a podcast that you should listen with Google on one hand or Wikipedia on one hand, so you can verify these facts and also learn more about the history of where these things come from. But by the 1990s, Southern hip hop had already made the relationship between rap and country explicit, because we're in the South, right? You are a black person, you are growing up. You're going in the South, you're going to have country whims, but you're also a black person, so you're also going to listen to hip hop. So think about the UGK. UGK didn't just rap about rural life, they named it. Pimp C famously referred to their own music as country rap. And at that time, it pushed against the northern hip hop gatekeeping that dismissed Southern Sound as like unsophisticated or not serious music. This was not a novelty. It's to me, it was more of an identity assertion. So, my point here is, I just want to show you why this thing is complex and why this thing honestly deserves to be talked about, right? Honestly, these are things that we take for granted because of how long they've been allowed to go on, but they are foundational to our understanding of the world as we have it now. Okay, let's move along here. Let's get to Lil Nas X. Let's get to Lil Nas X in 2019. And why that is an important chapter for us in discussing this. I think Lil Nas and Cowboy Carter are the main points in the issue where I will pin down my argument. Okay, this I guess this is called losing the plot for a reason. Before we get to Lil Nas X, I want to talk about, because I think one of the things I learned while doing this episode was like how much I had already subconsciously been fusing country and hip hop together, but on my own listening, because I think about like an artist like Bobby Sparks who blended southern rap flows with country themes. Cowboy Troy, I think Cowboy Troy was signed to Big and Rich's label, and Cowboy Troy performed rap verses over a banjo and a fiddle. There's also Colt Ford literally built a career on fusing instrumentation, on fusing country instrumentation with hip hop delivery. And what is important about all these artists that I've mentioned is that they were audience driven. These were not accidental. These artists who toured, who sold records, who built loyal fan bases in rural America. But again, what you will notice here was that when they fused these two genres together, it was largely legitimized when it centered around white artists or white audiences. If you went around in 2022, 2012, I think 2012, there was a what a times have been alive. I remember in 2012, Florida George Line remixed Cruise with Nelly, and that's an interesting time and interesting things have happened, because when Florida George Line did a song with Nelly, because Florida George Line, a white band, was who they were, it wasn't treated as a threat to country's identity. It was embraced. In fact, I remember that remix becoming like one of the biggest hits in country music history, and it helped. There's a sound called, I think it's called bro country, and what that remix did was like it helped kind of formalize that bro country sound, because it normalized trap influenced drums, hip hop cadences, literally hip hop, and crossover features. It was not a novelty, guys. It was a confirmation. What was happening here was that hip hop had already been influencing country from the inside, and the industry was fine with it as long as the person doing it was white. So this is a pattern that really, again, I'm trying to tie all of these together because it's important that we draw a complete through line in country and hip hop fusion, how it has existed, how it has worked, and how it has found its audience. So what changed with, you take that Florida George Line thing and you switch it around is when you have Lil Nas X. So with Lil Nas X is black and he features Billy Ray Cyrus. Florida Georgia Line, they are white. They feature a black Nelly. Lil Nas is black. He features a Billy Ray Cyrus, and he was the face of it. So when Old Town Road arrives, because of that, what it did to us was it essentially introduced a quote unquote a new genre and just exposed that old contradiction. So again, when it's a white person, it's celebrated as evolution, and when it's a black person, it's rejected as inauthentic. Right? So what made Cruise a hit was what made Old Town Road a problem. And you think about that on a deeper level as to why it was and is genre still about sound only when a black artist leads the charge. I'm thinking about, this is not even country. Ungodly Hour by Chloe and Halle is not considered to be a pop record for whatever reason. Again, Chloe and Halle are R&B singers and they are heavily influenced by R&B. But if we change who was singing that song, it would just be a pop record. It wouldn't be urban. It wouldn't be it would just be a pop record. So back to the Lil Nas X of it all is that Lil Nas X as the reveal of the person behind, because he didn't have a name, but the song was bigger than him at the time. So I think by the time they realized who was the person behind this quote unquote country song, it revealed how selective they were about it because of who was singing it. So when they removed Old Town Road from the country charts, the industry was forced to articulate rules it usually leaves unstated. And because of that, the genre boundaries were never about music alone. Again, as we've established, they've always been about control. Yeah? And I think I've talked about Old Town Road and this decision for a lot of this podcast. I don't want to belabor it, but I want to. There's a line I want to take out of Billboard's claim as to why they removed it from the Hot Country Songs chart, and they are this very pre-AI rambling. But the line that sticks out to me about why they removed it was that they claimed the song did not embrace enough elements of today's country music. A very vague nothing sandwich, eh? Because what they were saying was that the issue wasn't musical, it was categorical. Because who gets the time to determine what is enough of today's country music? They could have just said that he was black and would have kept it going. That he did not fit the visual mythology of who they think a country musician should be. So, because the question about Old Town Road was never, is this country? The question was always, is he country? And he country is always going to be code for, is he white? Yeah. So that was is a moment I think about a lot still, because again, going into listening to Cowboy Carter, it's just one of those moments that just really shows you what we are up against, and why it is important that like we fight these fights. Because after Lil Nas X, one Beyoncé Giselle Scholar is going to she's going to come to the stage. So let's go through Cowboy Carter really briefly. I think I've made my point essentially with this. But Cowboy Carter is interesting because Cowboy Carter, while Lil Nas X's country sojourn was accidental, I think he just found a beat and he made a song with the beat. He didn't plan on becoming a discourse of national conversation. Beyonce very much went into making Cowboy Carter wanting to prove a point. And unfortunately, I would say she was able to prove the points. Because even as clear as the point she was trying to prove was, it did not stop the people that would react the way they reacted from reacting how they reacted. So Beyonce's entry into country isn't a crossover. I would say it's not even a genre experiment. It's reclamation, not a detour. And I think that distinction matters because reclamation implies prior ownership. Cowboy Carter did not begin as a creative woman. Let's talk about why she even made Cowboy Carter. So Beyonce is from the South, as you know, or if you don't know, she's from the South. She's from Texas, Houston, Texas, H-Town. Yeah. And in 2016, on her album Lemonade, seminal. She had a song called Daddy Lessons, which was a very country influence track, or a country song, I would say. And she performed Daddy's Lessons at the Country Music Association Awards, accompanied with the Chicks. And the Chicks are even in the Chicks are, is a band of white women, but even in the country space, the Chicks are controversial to begin with. But anyways, Beyonce performs her country song with the Chicks at the Country Music Association Awards, and if you go and watch the performance was amazing. Like, it was musically sound, culturally coherent. They looked amazing, historically grounded. They, like, it was one of those songs where she blends country, blues, and southern storytelling. Nothing about it was foreign to the genre. For all intents and purposes, it was a country song. Yet the reaction from those that were in that room told a completely different story. The performance was met with so much hostility. I remember I was there. It was a lot of online harassment. There was a lot of racism. And because of that moment, Beyonce said, "Oh, y'all are pissed that I made a country song and performed it? Okay. Oh, okay." And Mama started to make her country album from that moment. And, you know, it I think it's instructional, because Cowboy Carter, in wanting to make a point, she didn't end up making a traditional country album, because she didn't want to assimilate, right? She wanted to be explicit about framing the project as a genre, as not a genre album specifically, but her album, a Beyonce album, someone who grew up in the South making a country record. And so Cowboy Carter exists more as and to me, a historical document where every song demands you do some level of research into country music and understand why it is the way it is today. So on the album, she centers Linda Martell, who is the first commercially successful Black female country artist, and Linda kind of guides us through the album with spoken interludes about the album's core argument, which is that the genre is a system of containment, and that is what artists like Beyonce are fighting to go over. And she does feature contemporary Black country artists, but also she features white contemporary artists. They're looking for the thesis of Cowboy Carter, the first and the last song, American Requiem and Amen. They are, just go listen to those songs. Those songs are the reason why the album is the way it is. And I think again, I can talk about Cowboy Carter endlessly, but I want to move on here and let's wrap this up. But what Cowboy Carter to me reveals is that country and hip hop were never opposite, because Cowboy Carter goes between genres in country and hip hop. There are songs like Spaghetti. There's definitely a hip hop influence on Cowboy Carter, and which is, I think, her point. So I've talked a bit about Taylor before. I've talked about Nas. I've talked about Miley. I don't want to kind of belabor these points. I think that I've been able to, in my thinking, been able to show you guys why things are the way they are, and I want to just ground them with Lil Nas and Beyonce, because I feel like those two things are very indicative of why we are where we are today. So by 2024 and 2025, well, I guess now we're 2026. But from starting from 2024, something has shifted in a way that is very impossible to ignore. And it's not that country music has just resurfaced. It has really dominated. So for months from 2024 till now, country records have sat really high up on the Billboard Hot 100, and hip hop artists have continued to lean into, I think, rural imagery like guitar, banjos, and southern cadences. And in the same vein, country artists themselves have leaned harder into trap drums, 808s, and R&B vocal processing. So that's why we have artists like Shabuzi, Jelly Roll, Big Star The Plug, for sure, Billy Zimmerman, right? Artists who live in this blur of country and hip hop being aligned. And I think that's the key. That's what I want to take out of today, is that hip hop is never replacing country, and country is not winning a cultural war. It's a convergence, and these genres are natural. Like, when you listen to a song that sounds country infused or hip hop infused or whatever, I want you to think about that. This is not an isolated event. What is happening now is what should have always happened. These genres are the same thing that have been called in different ways over the years. So that's why I think a conversation like this is not just like a music note conversation. It is very important because genre boundaries, as a metaphor, they affect careers. They affect who determines to be playlisted, who gets radio spins, who is dominated, who gets funding, who is taken seriously. So for artists, genres are not just an aesthetic, they're an infrastructure. So if you are placed in the wrong category, your audience won't be able to find you. People that are supposed to collaborate with you, they won't collaborate with you. Your growth will stall. So we need to, as listeners, yes, you can be an R&B lover, you can be a rock lover, but I implore you to listen more to the music and less about how it's presented to you. Because one thing you can learn from Lil Nas is that variety will not protect you from gatekeeping. And one thing I learned from Beyoncé is that no matter how big you are and no matter how much you master your craft, it does not guarantee acceptance. So all of these people, there's something for us to learn as artists, people that make music for sure. That I think for people that make music is a reminder that your music will always be judged through your identity, and your crossover may not be celebrated based on who you are, and your success may force people to change rules rather than welcome you. And for the listener, what I think this shows you is that genre shapes what stories reach you. So instead of you to color who you're listening to based on how they present, venture and challenge yourself, right? Because it determines whose experience as central as universal and those who are treated as niche. So when I'm talking about all of these things, we're never really arguing about just the genre. We're talking about ownership, about tradition, who gets to represent what. And again, this bleeds into everything else. So the bigger question I want to leave you guys here with is, if country and hip hop have always been related, and if their separation was always enforced rather than organic, what other boundaries in music are we mistaking for truth? Where else can we, like, what I want you to think about now is, where else can we see this? Where else can we see this, like, two genres or two things that are very similar in structure and in being, but have been colored in different ways? So zoom further and think about that, right? Okay, I think that's where I want to put things today, where I want to leave things today. For as always, please be sure to share your comments and concerns with me. I'm always down. And episodes are coming up. I'm working on episodes about how pop stars are built, which I'm really excited about. And yeah, there are a couple of things again, we're centering the rest of this season for now around music, so I'm really excited to keep pulling on that thread. But again, your feedback is always valued, and I really want to keep this going and get better at doing it and get better at doing research for this and the conversations and the scripts and all of those things. So please be sure to subscribe, comment, wherever you're listening to, and because it means a lot, because it goes a long way. All right, guys, that is all for today. Till next time, this has been Losing the Public Adeoluwa. Stay crowned and goodbye.